What is going on, everyone? I'm here with Maddy McDermott. Maddy was franchisee number 4 or 5, I think, and made this system super early on. And I wanted to bring on Maddy because she's actually no longer part of the Made This system. Maddy sold her unit and is on to the next thing. And I thought it'd be really cool for her to just hop on and talk about her experience. So, Maddy, thanks so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for the conversation, Neil.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I told you this before the call, but I'm pretty sad that you're no longer in the Maiden system because I felt like you were such a perfect fit with the core values of what we're doing. So I'm sad you're gone, but I'm happy that you're doing a lot of cool stuff. You just biked across Taiwan. You might be moving to Asheville. So big life changes. It's really cool.
Absolutely. No, it's been a pleasure to be part of the MaidThis system, and I've really enjoyed. I think you've done a really great job, kind of selecting folks who are a great fit with you and what you're all about, which is really cool. So
Cool.
that's really cool.
I appreciate it. So Maddie, can you tell me when you first started, why did you want to get into a franchise or entrepreneurship? Just maybe anything about your background and what you were looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in terms of entrepreneurship, my parents are small business owners. It's always been something that I've been interested in. I kind of coming out of school, worked at a couple big corporate organizations, got some experience there, but always wanted to do something smaller, do something more on my own. And I also actually had some experience working in franchises. So I started my career at the company that owns Burger King, Popeyes, and Tim Hortons.
Hmm.
Did a ton of different stuff there, like across different functions. Interacted with franchisees, worked on
Hmm.
marketing, a whole bunch of different things. So I actually had a little bit more exposure to franchises than your average person. So I felt
Yeah.
maybe more comfortable having dipping my toe into entrepreneurship through a franchise.
Cool. And was it a scary transition for you to say, I'm actually going to buy a franchise and keep my job? And like, how was that mental process for you when you were deciding to do this or not?
Um, I think it's one of those things where yes, it was a big decision, but it also didn't feel like I am, you know, like burning all the bridges. So, I still had a job, figured, worst case scenario, for whatever reason, if this doesn't go well, I'm out, a certain amount of my investment. But um, I felt comfortable with kind of taking that risk, especially because I had the cushion of continuing to have some income.
Yep.
So I would say it's one of those things where the less you know, the better in some cases. So
Yeah.
yeah, so for me, I think there's a lot of stuff that I wasn't necessarily prepared for, but you know, at the same time, it was a really exciting decision to make.
Cool. Yeah. It's kind of what a lot of people call an asymmetrical bet. Like if it goes well, great. And if it doesn't, your life doesn't really change that much. And it's upside, but limited downside. I think that's oftentimes how I think about at least made this. Maybe not all franchise systems where you might have a large investment amount, but I think for what we were doing, it seems like that was the case for you. Would that be a good summary?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the other like franchises that I've been involved with require like a huge build out. It's gonna, if you're building a Burger King, it's costs,
Hmm.
1 to 2 million
Millions.
dollars.
Yeah.
So it's a bit different versus with Made This, you don't have to kind of enter and bet the farm and
Yeah.
that type of thing.
So tell me about your journey. I mean, you were working a full-time job. How was it when you started? Just walk me through anything, pros, cons, challenges, like whatever you could share about your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I know you're familiar with this, and I think probably, a lot of the franchisees I've spoken to are, but I had like a kind of crazy series of events. So I decide to move forward with Made This.
Hmm.
I think I literally like wire the money, and then later in the day, I have a fall off of a horse, get a concussion. It was also I had already put in 2 weeks at a previous job. I was starting a new full-time job, a week later.
Hmm.
So I had this like series of three things happening all at once, which was kind of crazy. So um, I would say at the beginning, I ended up having a lot of like a very long recovery from this concussion. It was one of those
Hmm.
things where The injury itself wasn't that bad. I just didn't really totally get better. Tried a whole bunch of different things, and
Yeah.
that sort of took over a little bit of like, that was sort of my primary focus for a long time. So I will say, because I was starting a new job at that point and I had a little bit of like limited kind of screen time capacity, I was still able, like when I look back at it, it's pretty impressive. I was still able to start a Made This franchise during that time. So
Yep.
I think I was operational within like, 2.5 months, something like that. Partly because I was just able to kind of, because my new job was still ramping up and it wasn't too demanding yet. I was able to kind of just dedicate the time that I did have into, setting up the business. And I found that the training process and the sort of steps to get you operational,
Hmm.
everything that was laid out is exactly how it went down, if that makes sense. So I was able to plan that, around the time that I could work or couldn't work. And
Yeah.
it was pretty smooth getting started.
Megan, I'm curious, what was either at the beginning or throughout the process, what was the hardest part about running a Made This location for you?
Um, I would say for me, it was once I started getting busy, um, it was I had this weird health situation where I
Hmm.
didn't, I would be fine, I'd recover all weekend, work during the week, and then by Friday I was burned out.
Yeah.
And I'd be like laying in bed recovering with the lights off for like, the whole weekend. So the tough part for me was when I didn't always feel well, that
Yeah.
I'd have to be, dealing with a customer problem or calling someone back or trying to find a cleaner to cover. So it was most of the unexpected things that came up were a little bit difficult for me to deal with because of the health situation.
Got it.
Um, Honestly, with most of the Made This stuff that I've done, especially once I brought on remote team members, I was largely able to schedule around my job, which was nice. So
Yeah.
if I knew I was going to be traveling for work for 2 days, I was able to kind of, use my scheduling to make sure interviews were happening at different times. Team meetings were not happening during that time, and I was able to just stay connected over Slack. So once I kind of figured that system out and I had remote team members handling a lot of the customer
Yeah.
interaction, it helped a lot.
I recall you brought on remote team members relatively early, right? Just given your constraints, you said, let me just invest in this right up front. Was it within the first 2 to 3 months you brought on remote team members?
Yeah, yeah. I think that I started interviewing my first remote team member within a month. So I think we'd
Hmm.
only had maybe like 10 cleanings or something when she
Yeah.
started. So I started, working on training and transitioning very early on,
Yep.
just because I knew I had this sort of health constraint and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't relying on 100% me to be responding to things or on dial pad all the time. So
Yeah.
I brought on my first remote team member. Honestly, I brought on a second full-time remote team member a lot earlier than most franchisees would.
Hmm.
Again, for me, I was like, I need to focus on my health stuff. I'm really having trouble being able to manage this on the weekends because I'm usually kind of fried at that point with the concussion stuff. So I brought someone on who was full time but took over some of that weekend work,
Yeah.
so overlapped with my other team member, which was nice for me because um, if there's ever an issue, like someone's internet goes down or something like that, I generally had backup, even if I
Yeah.
wasn't available.
Yeah. It's pretty incredible. You set it up early on, right? Like you had the business
Mhm.
pretty automated without you in the day to day within the first year, probably first 6 months, I would say, right?
100%, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I spent more than 5 hours on the business in the month of
Wow.
August last year, which was like I had a bunch of travel, a bunch of, work stuff, like did not have any capacity and it was kind of a slow month. My team members basically handled everything.
Yeah.
That would have been, 9 months ish into
Yeah.
operating, or 10 months. So
Maddie, I'm curious now that you've sold your unit, which we'll get to in a second, what I'm curious, reflecting back, what skill do you think you developed the most having done this? And do you also have a recommendation of what skill you think people need the most when they do this?
Yeah, I would say for me, one of my biggest learnings and maybe things that I like skills that I developed was really people management. So both
Mm,
managing remote team members, doing training. Like I feel very good about our ops. And I feel like that my team members were very self-sufficient, partly
hmm.
through training and managing and guiding role that I played. Um, which I think is really, positive and important for the business.
Yeah.
The thing that I think hindered my success, and is something that I found that I wasn't particularly good at or wasn't really willing to invest the time and energy in, was more of the owner-based sales side. So as opposed to relying on just inbound or some of the existing online strategies, um, I didn't really have the capacity, the desire, the you know space to go out there and pound the pavement, and develop relationships with apartment complexes, property managers, local businesses. So that was, I think, where I struggled. Was I sort of ran the playbook as much as my remote team members could do, and
Hmm.
without investing a ton of time in the sales stuff myself. So I think that's one thing that I think franchisees really need to be successful is to, for me, I'm a very organized person. I'm really good at the ops stuff. I'm able to make the trains run smoothly.
Yep.
But in some ways, I think you need to put the sales craziness, cart before the horse of, operations.
Yep.
It needs to be a balance, but that was something I never really figured out. Partly because I just, had a lot going on. It's a bit of an excuse, but it wasn't something that I, really invested in myself.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good tip. And Maddie, tell me about your thought process of selling. You had this business well oiled. You had a couple of team members in there. Your operations running smooth. You had 5 hours per week of work that you were doing in August, or maybe the whole month of August. Forgot what you said.
Yeah.
What was your
Yeah.
reason for saying, "Hey, let me sell this unit now and go do something else"?
Yeah, I think what I realized was I was at a point where I had gotten myself the system was working well and I was set up, we had customers that we were servicing. Um and I didn't have to be super involved, but I had a little bit of a realization, this isn't going to just keep growing with LSA. This isn't just going to keep
Mm,
growing with some of, just repeat business. It wasn't going to be enough. Um, and or like organic leads. We were starting to get a lot of, more organic referral
hmm.
customers, people finding us on Facebook, which was great. But I had a realization that that was not going to be, it was going to be a very long time before that was going to be, enough growth for me to be profitable. Um, and I made the active decision to bring on remote team members when I wasn't, sales weren't that high. So
Hmm.
for me, I wasn't willing to, totally change the business model and get much more involved. But I knew it was going to be it was going to be a long time before this was going to be spitting off,
Yep.
cash in the way that I wanted to with the level of investment that I had. So I think my realization was, am I willing to do what I need to do to get to that point? And I think my answer was no. I think I've learned that I didn't really like doing some of that sales stuff,
Hmm.
some of the networking, so for me, I was thinking this business is in a place where things actually, run very smoothly, but I don't think that it's, um, I'm not the person to take it to the next
Yep.
step. So I wanted to, get basically see, I feel really proud of what was built, and wanted to pass that on to someone who I thought could be a really great steward of the business and,
Yeah.
grow it and, succeed in a way that, was what it deserved.
Cool. What you tell me about the sales process for you and how the whole thing went, how you found the people, how you eventually sold the business. How did that process go for you?
Yeah, honestly, I feel very lucky. It was a very, as far as business sales go, oftentimes my understanding, this is the first time I've sold business, but my understanding is oftentimes the cycle takes a really long time. It can be very, arduous. So I was very, lucky in the sense that Neil, you actually were, a huge help. Had connected me with a couple different people who were potentially interested in either, starting a new franchise or um, in a state where you're not franchising, or
Hmm.
were otherwise interested in acquiring an existing business. So had some conversations with folks, and eventually one of them kind of panned out. So at one point I did have a couple of people interested in the business that I was talking numbers with and everything, and eventually it worked out to sell to Dustin, so I was really excited about that.
Yeah. Yeah, and for everyone listening, I think that's a benefit of a franchise system is there's oftentimes people who inquire to open up their own location who then realize, hey, there's a unit for sale. Why don't I just buy the unit instead? So oftentimes the resale processes can be a lot faster. And also when you're in a franchise system, you know the software, you know how things work, everything's the same. So it's very simple to start rolling out other locations as well, which honestly, I didn't even realize was a benefit of the franchise system, Maddie, until we started trying to help you out. And I was like, oh, wow, this is actually a huge value, hopefully for future franchisees as well, where there's clearly a lot of people who want to get in who might be in the location that's already sold. It makes a lot of sense just to pass that along. So very cool.
Totally. And actually, I didn't mention that earlier, but that was another reason why I was interested in opening a franchise with MaidThis, as opposed to, I don't know, just starting a business with my under my own brand or something.
Hmm.
Is that, in without knowing that much about it, I felt that there is more of a resale market for something like that to be part of a franchise, especially as
Yeah.
as the business grows and there's locations all over the country or all over the world, however that goes. Um, it's you have that the value of the brand grows over time. So for me, it was
Yeah.
if I was to start something on my own and I wanted to sell it, it would probably be a different situation than if you're selling a franchise, which has a little bit more of a professional, flair and potential. So.
Yeah. Cool. Maddie, you've seen the inside of a lot of other franchise systems, and obviously with Made This as well being part of it, and we're in an emerging brand. I'm curious on your thoughts on the support system of an emerging brand like Made This versus some other things you've seen.
Yeah, yeah, it's actually really interesting. So my most recent job, I worked at a pet store franchise, so like a brick and
Hmm.
mortar store selling pet goods as well as doing like grooming operations. It's interesting because it's also a pretty young franchise. I think there's about 150 locations or so. And I had the opportunity to interact with a lot of franchisees who had been in the system for a while and a lot of newer franchisees. Um, that that company had gotten to 150 stores with virtually no training program, very little
Jeez.
by the way of brand standards. Obviously, when it's a pet store, like when I came in with an ownership group that had recently bought the franchisor, and a lot of our work was professionalizing and putting in a lot of these systems, but it was pretty incredible that they got that big with nothing really in place. So you go to
Yeah.
different locations, they all looked different, and all the
Jeez.
owners were doing things their own way. So especially in for something like that, very similar to Made This, individual locations are owned by individuals.
Hmm.
You have contractors who are performing cleanings. You're dealing or like for pets, pet
Hmm.
like pet grooming and things like that. Um, so similar model in the sense that individual owners are operating, but it really helps to have standards that are set or at least suggested by a franchisor. So um, with like pet grooming, there's a lot of safety related stuff that there's no standard for, and now they've implemented safety trainings and standards that didn't exist before. So I was pretty impressed with the Made This system, and I think was very best in class in terms of the trainings and support. Certainly not like anything I had seen at my previous jobs. And I think similarly, for like a Burger King franchise, something that's that large, most of the franchisees are existing. If you're opening new locations, it's typically with existing franchisees. At least when I was there, they weren't bringing in new franchisees, and there really wasn't any training program there either. So
Mm,
it's very, it's kind of different because it was, typically selling to existing restaurant operators who maybe know how things work. But um, I think that having that support system in place just makes a huge difference in ensuring the success of franchisees.
that's awesome. And last question, if anyone's considering Made This and listening to this and hearing about your experience, I'm curious what you would say to them.
I would say this is a really, really amazing way to learn a lot in a short time and be able to, benefit directly from the results. So for me, I think from where I was a couple of years ago to now, I have a lot more confidence in, my ability to manage, my ability to navigate through difficult customer situations, um, handle, opening a business, marketing it, running it. Like it was sort of like a crash course in how to run a business.
Yep.
I would say that it definitely pays to, I didn't really have this luxury because I kind of jumped in and pretty immediately was outsourcing a lot of the day to day to
Hmm.
remote team members. But I do think it really pays to be really scrappy about how go out and get customers and things like that.
Yep.
Um, we never really cracked the outbound code, but I, have seen a lot of franchisees, through the support group have some success with things like that. And I think that's really, really powerful. So, um, I think that being able to strike that balance between, how do I get out of just the day to day, like managing the cleanings, and how do
Hmm.
I go out there and focus on getting business, I think is important to think about if you're considering being part of the system.
Cool. Love it. Well, Maddie, again, thanks so much for being such an awesome part of the Made This community. I feel like, especially you being one of the earlier franchisees, set the tone for a lot of other franchisees. So thank you for everything. It's been awesome having you as part of the system. I'm happy you got the exit as well and on to the next thing. So thanks for everything, Maddie. Thanks for hopping on.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And if, anyone wants to reach out to me in the future, feel free. Happy to share more about my experience. Really appreciate everything that you've done and working with me on this, Neil. So overall, it's been a great experience.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Maddie. Take care.